Beyond the Gates spoilers for Thursday, October 16, 2025 tease that Haley decided to amputate Bill's leg. That statement is like a block of ice. It refracts the rest of what follows: a marriage dressed in gold, a kiss caught in the hallway, a plan whispered in a dark room, and a blood debt that existed long before any marriage vows were signed. The rumor itself violent, almost ritualistic images of a woman dismembering a man to punish him spread through the small town like oil spilled on a river. But the truth, once you get past the shock, is never simply an act of mutilation. It's the cumulative geometry of betrayal, the architecture of lies that makes such an extreme choice seem, at least to her, inevitable. To understand why Haley imagined and then carried out such a vile revenge, we must dissect the everyday atrocities that led her to this point, the silent humiliations, the unrequited favors, the way Bill's kisses were handed out like IOUs he had no intention of cashing. We must begin with the kiss that started it all. Haley had watched them for weeks, not with the fevered voyeurism of a romantic rival but with a ledger brain that registered transactions, favors, promises, small kindnesses rendered and later used as receipts against her. Bill kept his warmth measured, a slow-burning candle reserved for those he wanted to keep on the payroll of his life. Danny had been a kind of wildfire, a presence that made Bill forget to count until the next morning, when the math of his choices came due. The kiss Haley saw was not cinematic, it was domestic and casual, two people stepping into a pocket of softness in the middle of a windy, pragmatic existence. They kissed on the landing between the study and the solarium, the light from the ballroom windows framing them like a painting. It was private and, to Haley, impossible to ignore. She did not respond with immediate frenzy. There were stories of women who stormed rooms, breaking things as if demolition could erase the ledger of betrayal. Haley took a different route. She walked out of the house, not in pursuit, but toward Randy. There was a calculation there. Bill's sins were not merely infidelities, they were transactions that could be reversed, redirected, monetized. Haley knew how to turn social capital into cold cash. Randy was the vault. Randy's room smelled faintly of nicotine and lemon-scented furniture polish, an odd mixture that always made Haley feel as if she were stepping into someone else's careful rituals. The room was small enough that the heat between them wasn't only emotional, it was physical. A shared warmth that made speech optional. When you write scenes of conspiracy, it is ordinary spaces that sharpen the sense of intimacy: a low lamp, two chairs pulled close, a window that breathes in the night. The conversation started without theatrics. Randy's voice was a practiced instrument that made support sound like inevitability. "I've always had your back," he said, laying the phrase like a bandage over a wound he claimed to have known was coming. People who have not lived inside family entanglements might not understand how ties like blood or kinship can be both armor and trap. Randy and Haley shared more than memories. They shared a kind of mutual codependency that felt like safety when the rest of the world became a ledger. The pair had worked through messy things together before. Randy had helped craft a story that saved Haley's reputation once the fake pregnancy and had been instrumental in covering up what most in the town assumed was a miscarriage. They had navigated shame together, shaping public perception like a potter shaping clay. That prior work was both evidence of Randy's loyalty and a chilling precedent. When you have already helped someone erase a life, you have the capacity to participate in erasing a future. Haley explained, in flat, meticulous sentences, what she intended to do. Tomorrow was the enactment of Bill's next big public gamble, a party, a signing, a declaration of some expansion at his company that would, in her mind, be the last inflated balloon before everything was punctured. "He'll lose everything," she said, not as a threat but as an arithmetic certainty. "He has to." There was no sob. There was instead a kind of clinical fervor. She wanted to take the property, the power, the inheritance set aside for his children, and turn it into something that could never be used against her again. If divorce meant walking away empty-handed, she preferred a divorce with a ledger in her favor. Randy listened. He knew Bill's record, the betrayals that were more financial than romantic, the deal that betrayed Doug, The way Bill wrote other people's names on ledgers he then kept in his pocket. There were whispers in the town that Bill had done worse than cheat in boardrooms, that he'd sold colleagues, traded loyalty for leverage, and signed away small people for large promises. Randy's knowledge was practical. You could blackmail a man with a ledger, or you could remove him from the ledger entirely. They spoke not in abstractions but in tactical terms. Haley wanted to make Bill lose his marriage, his company, and the legacy he'd thought secure. She wanted him to lose the right to make decisions about his children's inheritance. For Haley, the stakes were personal. She had been disadvantaged, hidden, humiliated. For Randy, the stakes were less sentimental and more opportunistic. The money he could extract could be used to settle past debts, to buy the kind of clean break a man sees as redemption. They both understood how to weaponize the wedding itself, a public moment that would, if sabotaged correctly, reveal negligence, fraud, and malfeasance. Randy's role was not small. He had facilitated the fake pregnancy. He knew how to fabricate evidence, how to manipulate timelines in a town that liked neat narratives. If Haley wanted Bill financially ruined before a divorce, Randy could arrange for funds to go missing, for signatures to be forged, for a paper trail to evaporate. But even he hesitated at the physical cruelty the rumor suggested. Cut off a leg, he said once, more to name the metaphor than to interrogate the logistics. The image lodged between them like a grotesque idea that might be used as theater, a symbolic act so extreme it would make Bill's life irrevocably different. It was, at first blush, an intimidation tactic. But the more Haley spoke, the more you could see how the idea morphed from metaphor into plan. She had been contemplating humiliation for years. Not the noisy humiliation of broken glass and peeled wallpaper, but the deep, abiding erosion of someone's capacity to act. A man with his leg gone was a symbolic figure, half the swagger removed, mobility reduced, the future of the company's handshake economy compromised. In Bill's world, image was capital. Remove that image and you hollow the man from the outside in. The plan was not about blood for blood, it was about incapacitation as retribution and as leverage. Beyond mere personal vengeance, there was an economic logic. If Bill was physically disabled, visibly, permanently altered, the courts, the investors, and the board would inevitably recalculate. Executives rely on appearances. A leader who looks diminished invites doubt. Share prices wobble on optics as much as on balance sheets. If the company was pushed into crisis by the spectacle of injury and scandal, the senior management would scramble, and with the right inside knowledge, Randy and Haley could redirect the flow of capital before regulators or family aligned to defend Bill. It would look, to the outside world, like a tragic accident. But to the two conspirators it would be a surgical strike. Haley's motives, when you scraped away the rage, were threefold: revenge, security, and narrative control. She wanted Bill to lose the capacity to punish her, to close off the option that he would, from a position of renewed power, erase her claims. She wanted to secure money for herself in a way that could stand legal scrutiny, not by winning a courtroom brawl, but by orchestrating a collapse that rearranged who had legal claim. And she wanted to control the story, to turn the public's view of Bill from affluent patriarch to impotent victim. In her mind, this would be the ultimate counterpunch. If he had used his wealth to manipulate loyalty, she would use strategy to manipulate assets. Randy, for his part, was less motivated by story and more by numbers. The knowledge that Bill had double-crossed Doug, a friend who once trusted him, was not ancient gossip. Randy had seen Doug's ledger and heard the whispers in the bar where men exchanged confidences over scotch. Bill had promised Doug a margin of partnership, then folded that margin into a bigger play. People loved to forgive romantic indiscretions, they rarely forgave financial betrayal, especially when it impacted livelihoods. Randy knew how to turn Doug's story into proof: a series of misfiled invoices, a misrouted check, a contract amendment added to a bundle of official correspondence. With those ingredients, he could build a case, or at least invent one convincing enough to make investors nervous. There was also the personal entanglement that made Randy's presence in Haley's life more complicated. They were not only conspirators, they were family. The rumor was that they were cousins, But family here was an elastic term. The closeness they shared had been formed in small acts, a hand smoothed over a fevered forehead in childhood, a shared suitcase in times of crisis, and a mutual willingness to perform moral laundering on each other's behalf. Randy had been complicit before in stage managing an abortion that the town would believe was miscarriage. When you normalize serious cover-ups in private, you also pave the way for future complicity. It's easy to say I'll help you once. It's harder to refuse when the ask escalates. That history of cooperation makes future transgressions feel both possible and permissible. Haley's insistence that she would strip Bill of his inheritance rights toward his children, an act that would alter the family's future, created a moral knot. She argued, in private, that Bill's mismanagement and manipulative marriages were already a theft of future peace for his heirs. Her calculus was twisted but internally consistent. Bill had broken the town's social contract through repeated betrayals, therefore, she would preemptively remove his ability to continue the harm once divorce loomed. To her, this was not purely vindictive, it was corrective justice. But the law disagrees with vigilantism, and the law in their town liked neat settlements and predictable testimony. So the plan had to be both theatrical and plausible, a dramatic injury to Bill that would force a reorganization of power and, crucially, open accounts that Randy could siphon. This is when the social pressure around Haley's upcoming marriage to Bill came into play. The marriage itself was contested. Many people, seeing the way Haley moved through life, efficient, strategic, unromantic, suspected she was a predatory planner rather than a lover. Bill's decision to marry her had been met with whispering resistance. Friends told him in private he was making a mistake. Danny, who loved Andre and whose kiss had been the spark for all of this, was not jealous in the cliched sense. She was fearful of what Bill's choices would do to the safety net he had promised his children. Bill, notable for being quick to moralize, had lectured Danny that marrying Andre could jeopardize the inheritance he planned to leave, an odd stance considering that Bill's own marriage could do the same to his children, if he was not the steward everyone thought he was. So there is hypocrisy baked into every relationship here. Bill positions himself as a guardian of family legacy while secretly dissolving trust for personal gain. Haley, a woman positioned as manipulative, is in fact acting from a complex mixture of self-preservation and calculated revenge. Andre, Danny's suitor, is painted by Bill as a threat to stability, but in truth Andre is earnest, someone who loves Danny and sees in marriage a form of salvation rather than a certificate of exploitation. It's a neat inversion. The man accused of scheming Haley is exercising a form of agency that, in her mind, fights back against a system that allows men like Bill to weaponize love. The man who warns against Andre, Bill, is the one who has already weaponized the ledger. The wedding day, then, it is a public performance of a private contract. Guests in their finery remind Haley of all the ways society rewards appearances, and she uses that setting like a chessboard. Randy's plan, at base, is to convert the wedding's openness into a point of exposure. He will fabricate paperwork that shows Bill misappropriating company funds, redirect a payment into an offshoot account, and create the impression that Bill's corporate holdings have been collateralized against personal loans made to covert entities. Investors who see such a glitch often retreat. The board, seeing vulnerability, will seek expedient leadership changes. Haley and Randy will then be in position to swoop, claim authority under emergency statutes, or at least gain access to the company's purse strings. But the human element complicates even the slickest financial plan. Emotions leak. A bank teller might notice an odd deposit and ask questions. A son might intercept an email and go rogue. Haley's internal conflict surprises her. The memory of the kiss still stokes something other than vindictiveness. She finds herself cataloging Bill's smaller, kind actions: a plate of soup left on a sick day, the way he straightened a child's collar at a school ceremony. In the quiet before the storm, sentiment flutters like a moth to a dim light. She steels herself against it with arithmetic. Kindnesses are transactions too, and Bill had treated kindness as a commodity. She repeats this mantra until it begins to feel like truth. Randy, in private, admits to a sliver of doubt. He is not a moral man, But he imagines the slog of being on the run from a public scandal. He imagines what it would mean for their names to be tied to a physical assault on Bill if anyone traced it back. "We do it clean," he says. "No blood, no trace that ties it to us." The difference, for both of them, between metaphor and crime is forensic detail. They will stage a fall, make Bill appear the victim of a freak accident. That way, the crippling element is real. Yet the makers of the accident remain shrouded. It is a grim sort of logistical creativity. In the immediate hours before the wedding, small things unravel. There is a misdelivered envelope. A security camera in the parking structure captures the wrong angle. A maid sees a figure moving oddly beneath a car. Almost like a cautionary tale, the universe insists on introducing variables. Haley's meticulousness, once her greatest weapon, now risks being the thing that reveals them. She tightens her plan, reroutes accounts, and ensures Randy has multiple exit strategies. If you are going to stage an accident in a world that loves to narrate accidents, you must be a better storyteller than the town's gossip. At the reception, Bill is radiant in the way of men who feel protected by inheritance. He gives a speech about legacy, about how family is the soil from which everything else grows. Haley smiles, practiced and sharp. Beneath it, she is constructing the timeline of the catastrophe. Randy is a shadow at her back, moving among accountants and servers, setting in motion the financial misdirection. Danny is somewhere between rage and devastation, watching the life she once imagined unspool in someone else's hands. Andre stands near, hands clenched into fists he refuses to use. The room is a pressure cooker of loyalties. When the moment comes, it is not cinematic. The thing they had planned, the staged fall, is triggered by a misstep on the terrace. Bill stumbles on a loose flagstone. A waiter, carrying a tray, collides into him, and Bill falls. The terrible physics of momentum turning a graceful man into someone suddenly broken. A scream, knives of light, spilled champagne. There is an immediate rush of kindness as well, hands outstretched, medical aids summoned. The kind of primal assistance that erases strategy in the moment. Bill is hurt. The doctors say it's serious. The injury is real enough to change trajectories. But the town, that great judge, sees an accident and tucks it into its ledger. Some accidents are merciless fictions and others are plain misfortune. The question becomes whether anyone will look hard enough at the paperwork, the redirected funds, the odd timing. In the immediate aftermath, panic and purpose blend. Haley's triumph tastes like metal. Randy is triumphant, but beneath his jubilation is a cold appraisal of contingency. Did the shunt of funds register as planned? Did the board call? Was the paper trail convincingly chaotic? The first triple hits, a short statement from the company, then a flurry of calls from legal advisors. Investors freeze. The board meets in emergency session. The family is distraught. But the goal to reposition power while Bill is vulnerable is achieved in part. They cannot yet claim the company outright, but they can create enough doubt to make a takeover plausible. Still, even as they move through the clean choreography they rehearsed, unaccounted variables gum up the machinery. A whistleblower on the accounting team, a kid who remembers seeing a second car in the alley, a security clip that shows more than the intended angle. All of these things hurl the plan into a new orbit. Haley and Randy must adapt in real time, moving from premeditated sabotage to improvisational cleanup. The town's gossip mill begins to smell smoke. People who once thought of Bill as a titan now count his toes with suspicion. The narrative is shifting, but the endgame is not yet certain. A narrative built on lies requires constant maintenance. Each lie births a dozen smaller lies to prop it up. The toil of maintaining an altered truth is enormous, and both conspirators feel the strain. Haley, who once celebrated control, now discovers there are parts of a life that evaporate when you attempt to rewrite the past. She misses, oddly, the unblinking clarity of a life before ledger revenge. Randy, who had imagined money as the panacea, begins to see how money cannot purchase absolution. It can only change the geometry of power. As the first part of this expanded narrative closes, Bill is wounded, the company's stability is slipping, and Haley and Randy have managed to redirect the flow of funds, but at a cost they are only just beginning to estimate. The town is abuzz. People whisper about Haley's motives, Randy's history. The ethics of taking a man's ability to walk as currency. Danny mourns the lost possibility of a life with Bill as he might have been. Andre's love is tested by the ridiculousness of the situation. Lawsuits loom like storm clouds. The question that hangs in the air is not only whether Bill can recover his leg literally and figuratively, but whether the economy of vengeance will collapse under the weight of its own fabrication. The camera pulls back as the characters stand on the edge of the precipice they made. And for a moment the world holds its breath, wondering which of them will fall next. The morning after the accident, the town moves with the sluggish attention of a place that has been told to pretend normality while its center smolders. People go to work and speak soft condolences. Florists receive orders with hands that tremble. In the emergency ward, Bill awakens to a world that feels both intimate and estranged. Pain anchors him to the present, but when he blinks, his mind swims with the memory of champagne, laughter, and then the sudden tilt into darkness. He's told the injury is severe, not yet the catastrophic amputation that rumor hinted at, but the medical team uses language that smells of possibility: infection risk, compromised blood flow, a bone splintered beyond neat repair. Bill hears a dozen futures in these phrases. His fingers, once decisive in spreadsheets and in moral judgments, now feel like foreign currency. He passes through a haze of morphine and legal calls. His mind reaches for control the way a drowning man reaches for a rope. Haley watches from a distance, pretending to be concerned. She may have engineered the collapse, but proximity is still necessary. The family, oddly, gathers in the hospital waiting lounge with the murmured rituals of people who are both conspirators in their own lives and oblivious to the machinations around them. Danny is diminished by grief and suspicion, torn between her love for Bill in some older, kinder chronology and the knowledge that his choices have betrayed others. Andre sits with his hands folded, an island of moral clarity that makes the rest feel guilty by comparison. For all the plans and counterplans, the human core of the story asserts itself in the small, unmediated gestures: a hand on a shoulder, a squeezed palm, a whispered apology or prayer. While this plays out, Randy moves through the town like a ghost with purpose. He has the accounts to move and a series of shell corporations to absorb the money he coaxes from the company's wobble. There is an art to misdirection, a cut that appears legitimate, a loan that masks a transfer, a furnace of paperwork where dollars go to be anonymized. Randy has a talent for legal mimicry, making reality look like compliance. He deposits funds in accounts that will later be claimed as loans, invest in commodities that appear conservative on paper, and use coded descriptions that a cursory audit won't flag. He knows how to bury a skeleton in a ledger so deep that only a prophetic accountant could dig it up. He also knows, instinctively, the moral weight of his actions, yet he contains it like a man who can hold his breath. At the same time, whispers bloom into rumors and rumors into inquiries. A member of the company's accounting team, a woman named Clara who had grown suspicious of the odd transfers, aligns a few pieces that create a larger picture. Clara is not a crusader, she is a careful professional who likes balances to match and audits to reconcile. She notices the pattern: funds rerouted to a consulting firm that does not exist in physical space but in the abstract ether of shell companies. Clara brings the discrepancy to her supervisor, who, faced with the possibility of a scandal that could bring down careers and companies, chooses delay over exposure. Corporate self-preservation has a way of vaccinating institutions against self-scrutiny. The legal cloud thickens. Lawyers pick through contracts with the clinical interest of men who prune diseased branches. Haley's plan required finesse, and she thought she had it. Randy's work had been precise. But legal systems are not monoliths you can turn at a whim. They are messy organisms with attorneys, elected officials, and whistleblowers who act out of complicated motives. A single piece of overlooked evidence, an expense report with a handwritten note, a time-stamped photo taken by an intoxicated guest can puncture a whole defensive wall. Haley begins to grasp that creating an accident is easier than protecting it from the slow corrosive logic of inquiry. The townsfolk begin to pick sides. In a small community, alliances are as durable as habits, and every person who chooses a side does so with moral calculus that includes their own comfort and safety. Some are believers in Haley's narrative, that Bill was not the virtuous steward he pretended to be, that he deserved humiliation for his betrayals. Others see Haley as the predator, the woman who struck first and with an almost theatrical cruelty. The public discourse is not academic, it is raw and human, touching people who must buy groceries and care for aging parents, who assess the scandal through the lens of their own small moral code. Andre becomes an unexpected moral compass. He refuses to be pulled into vengeance theaters. He speaks up for principled action rather than for an eye retribution, and in doing so he alienates some who crave triumph and earns respect from those who mourn what the town is losing. He insists that justice should be procedural, not theatrical. This stance makes him a target for scorn from those who want a scapegoat and a salve for their anger. But it also galvanizes a few quiet allies who have watched Bill's hubris and Haley's ambition and want a more honest resolution. Meanwhile, Haley feels the tidal pull of her own choices. There is a private, unspoken ache that hits her at odd times, in the mirror, when she sees the sharp lines she has drawn around her face, in the quiet of nights when she imagines a child's voice she once feigned hearing in a false pregnancy, in the echo of Randy's laughter that once felt like salvation and now sounds like a coin dropping into a drain. She begins to understand the cost, the moral erosion that happens when you justify harm as reparation. Her original logic that Bill had accrued a ledger of wrongs that demanded correction now sits beside an intuitive sense that she has become what she once fought against, someone who reduces people to balance sheets. Randy, observing Haley's slippage into moral fog, starts to worry about exposure. He had always been pragmatic about the cost of secrecy. The money you spend to keep a lie in place is often more than the price of the lie itself. So he begins to make a contingency plan, documents that will shift blame, a plausible scapegoat, a trail of evidence that might confuse investigators long enough for them to lose interest. Randy is a professional at erasing fingerprints from narrative. His pragmatism, however, can be cruel. In the cold calculus of safeguarding himself, he contemplates sacrificing Haley's public reputation to preserve his freedom. He considers a slow release of data that paints Haley as the mastermind, a narrative in which he was the reluctant accomplice. He is careful. Betrayal is an art form he avoids practicing unless absolutely necessary. That tension, Randy's potential treachery, is the hidden fuse under the entire episode. The history of their alliance suggests that Randy can and will abandon loyalty if it suits his survival. Haley, in her narrow tunnel vision, has not fully accounted for the ease with which the man who once helped fake a life would now fake a betrayal. The knowledge of this possibility sharpens her paranoia and forces her to make preemptive moves, securing copies of data, creating back channels of communication, and ensuring she has the moral high ground wherever possible. She crafts a story for the public rooted in victimhood and righteous indignation, knowing that optics can be as powerful as legal arguments. As investigations begin, a subplot rises. Doug, the betrayed partner whose ledger had been sold out by Bill, decides he cannot watch in silence. Doug, who had plenty to lose if the company collapsed, nonetheless feels a moral wound that demands action. He reaches out to Claraith's diligent accountant, and together they assemble a dossier of anomalies that paint a pattern of financial manipulation. Doug's motivation is mixed. There is revenge, yes, but also a desire to restore the dignity that was taken from him. He does not want to see the town's economy built on betrayal. He wants accountability. Doug becomes, reluctantly, the moral force that compels proper scrutiny. The legal inquiries bifurcate the town. Some see the legal system as their savior, others view it as a slow beast that will eat files while human lives pass. There are late-night phone calls, rumors of subpoenas, and threats of injunctions. The company's board, anxious to preserve market confidence, begins to press for a quick reconciliation that might avoid public spectacles. Everyone is, in their way, trying to control narrative as much as reality. At the center of the chaos, Bill wrestles with a new reality. Immobilized and humiliated, He confronts the fragility of the identity he once wielded so easily. He thinks of his children and the ways he had assumed their future like an entitlement. The possibility of losing the right to decide their inheritance gnaws at him. He had warned Danny about Andre in a fit of paternalistic pride, a curiously defensive posture for a man whose morality was already suspect. Bill now must wrestle not only with physical rehabilitation but with the moral accounting of his life. For the first time, the ledger of his life is balanced with losses he cannot simply buy back. The story accelerates toward a moment when secrets must either be revealed or sealed. The legal proceedings, the whistleblower's dossier, and the town's gossip all converge. Haley and Randy find themselves sheltering in a house that once felt like a safe room for conspiracies, now feeling like a fortress whose walls are thin. They debate whether to go public with an apology engineered to deflect suspicion or to double down on their narrative. Randy, ever the trader of futures, suggests a third path: to manufacture a crisis that forces a settlement, a negotiation that would keep both their names clean enough to survive. Haley, whose soul has been eroded by years of being underestimated, is less willing to compromise. The difference between them becomes stark. Randy calculates, Haley idealizes a certain kind of justice. And then, in the quiet before a legal storm, an unforeseen variable appears. A recording, made accidentally by a guest at the wedding, surfaces. It is a small file, 1 minute and 17 seconds long, captured by a phone that was filming the fireworks. The clip, when sped and analyzed, reveals a conversation on the terrace just before the fall, a hushed exchange between two men not on the guest list. The identities in the recording are unclear, but there is a voice that is not Bill's and not Randy's. The town, which devours mystery like bread, sours into a more complex suspicion. Was there another architect? Was the tangled web larger than Haley and Randy? If so, then their careful plans become the center of a larger constellation of culpability. The recording becomes the focal point of investigations. People who thought they had a script to follow now must rethink the cast. Doug and Clara, who walk the fine line between revenge and justice, are suddenly faced with a narrative too large for simple revenge. They must decide whether to expose the truth fully and risk the town's collapse, or to close the matter quietly and preserve livelihoods. The moral choices multiply like branches in a storm. As the legal noose tightens and the human cost grows, the town inches toward a moral judgment. No single character remains untouched. Haley, who started with a ledger of grievances, begins to see that erasing Bill's capacity is not the same as changing the system that made such acts imaginable. Randy, the pragmatic enabler, realizes that the money will never be enough to buy peace. Bill, no longer the omnipotent patriarch, must reckon with the emptiness he curated through wealth and manipulation. Danny and Andre, the quieter moral centers, must decide whether to build a life in a community that has been rent by scandal or to leave it behind.